You're right, fellow mini painters and lovers of all things Oldhammer related, and welcome to another video from Nostalgiahammer Hobbies. This video is going to be a third instalment of the squat commission that I'm doing for a client, and in this one I'm going to be doing some dwarf bikers. These ones are very different from the original Citadel miniature squat bikers that you used to get, but they're still very interesting and I really like the sculpts, and I hope you do too. So let's get yourself a cuppa, go to the painting desk, and I hope you enjoy the journey of painting these. So these miniatures are from the company Macrocosm, and I featured some of their models in the first video in this series that I'm doing for the squat commission. And again, these models, even though they do look very different from the Citadel ones that came out back in the day, those having a very trite sort of look to them, these ones have a very sort of old school classic Harley look to them, which I think helps them fit very nicely with that old school aesthetic. And the company also does a sidecar setup, which I think works very nicely for attack bikes. Now the client has asked me to paint these in the same way as the website's got them painted. And it was actually an awful lot of fun doing it. So I figured that I'd do another video and let everybody else see how I do this. And if you fancy giving it a go yourself, you can do so and follow along this video if you'd like. So enough of the preamble, let's get yourself that fresh cup of tea, get to the painting desk, and let's get some paint to these beauties. First step in painting these ones is going to be the deepest areas, and for that it's all metallic areas. So I'm going to be using lead belcher for that, and just use whatever brush you use for your base coats, and just get that in there. And the reason it's better to do these is because they're all the deepest areas. It doesn't matter if you're a little bit messy with it and you get some on other areas, because you will be able to just tidy it up as you go by applying the other base colours. Once the lead belcher is done, the next colour I'm going to be using is going to be Corvus Black, and that I'm putting on the tyres. I like this colour for doing tyres or anything that's like a sort of a black rubbery colour. This has got a slight greeny tint to it, and for me I think this does help to suggest rubber quite nicely. I do like the detail on these bikes as well, especially when you get to around here where you've got the chain visible going to the driver. That's something that I quite like. And at this stage it also isn't too much of an issue if you get some of the black on the metallics that you've already done. You can just go in and touch up the metallics. After the tyres have been done, I'm going to do the body of the actual bike itself. And for that, if you look at the picture on the art on the website, you'll see that it's, or at least from what I can see, it looks like it's a bit darker than the green that I use for their armour, like for their shoulder pads and stuff. So for that, what I'm using is Warg Flesh, and I'm just going to do that on everything that's going to be the motorbike. All these really have got, these models particularly, that's the other green, is that shoulder pad there. So I'll get to that. Here you go, you've got your fuel tank just up in there, and you've got the rest of the bike. Once I've done the green, I'm going to be doing the brown areas. And first of all, I'm going to do his seat that he sat on. And for that, I'm going to be using Dryad Bark. And there's only a couple of areas of brown on this model. And you don't have to use two different browns. You can use the same brown if you want. I'm just using the two different browns because I have them, and it's nice to add a little bit of difference between the areas. And the other area of brown that I'm going to do is going to be his gloves, boots, and his jacket. And for that, I'm going to be using Rhinox Hide. After I've done those two browns, I'm going to do his trousers. And I'm going to be doing then the same denim that I did for the last set of these miniatures that I painted for the client. And I'm going to be using Calgar Blue as the base for it. After that, I'm then going to do the few little pure black areas that we've got. And that has just got a little belt that goes around most of these guys here. So I'm going to do that in Abaddon Black. And we've also got little areas like the end of his handlebars here, as well as his little footrest. If you've got the ones which have the weapons on their left hand instead, I would paint those weapons the same way as I painted the weapons in the first video of this series, which I will try and link in the description and up in the top corner about now. Another thing I'm going to do is just in the end of the exhaust pipe, I'm going to paint this bit black as well. For their shirt sleeves, I'm going to give them a base coat of Pallid Witch Flesh. In this one, there's going to be the two different colours. So we're going to have the grey type of cloth and the more sepia coloured cloth. But both of those use this as a base colour. The skin, I'm going to use Bugman's Glow again. Now these ones with the helmets have got very little skin on show. It's basically just their nose. Another one's got a little bit of cheek visible and their lip. But a couple of the other sculpts have more of their face on show. So Bugman's Glow for that. They've all got beards. This one I'm going to be doing as a ginger one. So I'm going to be using Jaquero Orange for the base of this. Next up, I'm going to be doing their helmets. If you look on the website, you'll see they've got two different colour helmets. One is a sort of almost white, and the other one is a very, very light blue. For the one that is very, very light blue, I'm going to give it a base of Fenrisian grey. And I'm just going to put that on the helmet. For the white one, I used a base coat of Pallid Witch Flesh, which I just built up to get as nice, smooth a coat as I possibly could. And then finally, what is pretty much one of the last base coats to do is on his armoured shoulder pad here. I'm going to use Lauren Forest. I've also used that on the biker with the gas mask as well. I also at this point remember that the visor needs to be black and these little side bits on his helmet. So I've primed those up black as well. A couple of the sculpts have even got cigars in the mouth. And for that, what I'm going to do is a base colour of Mornfang Brown. And basically just pick out the whole of the cigar with that one. It doesn't matter about the end. Paint over that. There are also some lights on these bikes. For the blue ones, I used Calidor Sky. For the red ones, I used Mephiston Red. And for the yellow ones, I used Avalon Sunset. Now we're almost done. There's only one more colour to do for a base coat. The last little base coat that I'm going to apply is these little vent things on the side of the helmet. And for that, I'm going to be using Balthazar Gold. And just go over it so you try not to fill in because they've got these tiny little bits of detail on them, which is really cool. And that, I believe, is the last of the base coats. Next up, we're going to start the washes. This is quite a simple one, so we're just going to whiz through it quickly. On all of the lead belcher areas, I'm just going to simply do a coat of Nuln Oil, and I'm also going to do that on the tyres. After the Nuln Oil, I am then going to do all of the brown areas. This includes the seat of his motorbike, his jacket, and his cigar if you have it. For that, I'm going to use Agrax Earthshade. You would also use Agrax Earthshade if you'd given him, say, a brown beard as well. The next areas I'm going to wash is going to be the green areas. So that's like his shoulder pad and the main body of the bike. For that, I'm going to be using Athonian Camo Shade. Over his shoulder pad, you don't really want to do too much of it. You just want to get a nice layer of it over there. Just get a nice thin coat sort of thing and just tint it in. Over the actual body of the bike, you want to kind of put it on there a lot more heavily. You don't want to be putting it on so heavily that it's pooling up, but you do want to make sure that you're really getting a good darkening of the surface for this one. And if you do see any areas where it is excessively pooling, make sure you just keep a little bit of an eye on it and just drag those bits around if they are. Like that, see? For example, under there. So, after the first coat of Athonian Camo Shade, I'm actually going to go back in and do a second coat of this over just the body of the bike itself. And this will just help to darken it off just that little bit more. After the green's been done, next wash I'm going to do is over the blue trousers. For that I'm going to use a contrast paint, Griff Charger Grey. And you don't want to slop this on, but you do want to use this as a nice little wash just to help darken the recesses and tint the surface of the trousers that we're doing. I'm also going to use the Griff Charger Grey on the Fenrisian Grey helmet. Put this on all over it like a wash and a sort of a surface tint. We are basically going to be reapplying over this the Fenrisian Grey, but we're just going to apply this on as a nice little wash as well. For the other helmets, what I've used is the Pallid Witch Flesh base coat, and then over that I've actually used Basilicanum Grey contrast paint in the same way. After that, I'm going to do his shirt sleeves. And for the off-white ones, I'm going to be using Basilicanum Grey, like this. And for the other colour shirt sleeves that I've done, I used Contrast Paint Skeleton Horde over them. And for the ginger beard, I'm using Fugan Orange. If you did brown beard, you would use like Agrak Thirst Shade. And if you've gone for the more blondier colours, you can use either Reikland Flesh Shade or Seraphim Sepia, which is the one I used. And the final wash is just over the little bits of skin. So on this guy, it's only got his nose. But on the other ones, you will have faces. And I've used Reikland Flesh Shade over that. Now that we've got all the washes done, you could, if you really wanted to, just leave it at this stage and do the base. They don't look too bad at all, I don't think. The detail's really nice. But we are going to add some highlights to this. We're just going to do a simple one-stage highlight and bring it up to a nice tabletop standard for it. And we are going to start by doing the metallics parts. First one I'm going to do is I'm going to reapply Lead Belcher and just do this over the larger areas just to bring back some of that nice metallic-y shine to it, because Nuln Oil can kill that shine a bit, and try and leave the Nuln Oil in the darker recesses. After the Lead Belcher, I'm going to go up to Iron Breaker for a highlight. And for anything that's tube shape, I'm just going to do the uppermost edge of it and then drag it down a little bit so that it adds a nice bit of shine to it. And a good way of doing this is if you have the model held towards the light and you can see where the reflections are, paint exactly over where those are. You may not see much of a difference because the Iron Breaker is quite a close colour to what you are painting over with the light naturally reflecting off it. But when you take the model out of the light, you will be able to see the reflections and the highlights that you've painted on. Once the metallics have been done, I'm going to highlight the green areas. And for that, I'm going to use the same green for both the darker green on the bike and the lighter green that's on his shoulder pad. And I'm going to use Strachan Green for this. And the reason I'm going up slightly brighter for the dark green bike body is because if you want to do just a one-stage highlight and not necessarily have to spend too much time doing it, if you've got quite a few models to do, for example. And it's a good idea to actually step it up a level from what you would normally do. So for the darker green bike body, the colour I would normally use would be Lauren Forest. But where you want it to be just one stage highlight and jump up, then it's a good idea to use the brighter green instead, just so that it adds that extra bit of highlight without you having to spend the time to do it. And that's quite a handy trick to do with all colours. And you can actually see on this model where what I've done is just now I actually highlighted all the green in the Lauren Forest. And then I realised that where I'm only doing the one stage highlight, that the Lauren doesn't go bright enough. Which again, like I said, is one of the good things about painting models, is if you do make a bit of a mistake or a bit of an error and you have to go back, it is just paint. It's not difficult to go over it. Yeah. And although this green does look quite bright and stark when it's initially put on, remember that as paints dry, they will lose some of that brightness and they will tone down as you go. And there we go. And that's the green done. You can see how that brighter green, stepping it up that little bit on the biker body, has made it stand out just that little bit extra. The next part I'm going to do is highlight the trousers. And for that, I'm going to go back in and reapply the Calgar blue, but just leave it where the Griff Charger grey has collected in the recesses. After that, I am then going to use Fenrisian grey to highlight the trousers, and I'm just going to pick out the tiniest little, like just the corners here where they're raised on the creases, and a little bit down there. There you go. And I'm also going to use this Fenrisian grey and reapply it over the helmet on everywhere except where the recesses are. But I'm going to paint over a couple of bits like that. Okay. With the Fenrisian grey reapplied to the helmet, he's looking a lot brighter. So what I'm going to do is jump up and do an edge highlight around on the helmet. For that, I'm going to be using Blue Horror. And it's just a case of picking out the edges around the helmet itself And then around there you can just run your brush down the edge of it. And one thing this does show when you look at the helmet is that obviously if in the video you can see that there is some mold slippage that's visible around here. Now I did file quite a lot of that down just around the helmet, but just on the ridge there's quite a little bit. Now as you paint over that does disappear quite a bit. Now you can still see it quite badly in certain lights here, but remember this is under harsh lights for filming. When you take it away you won't really notice that. After that I'm going to highlight the shirt sleeves. For these, the paler white ones with the basilican and grey over it, I'm just going to go on with Pallid Witch Flesh again and use this as the sort of a highlight colour. If you thin it down and just paint it over the raised areas, it works quite nicely. For the ones which have got the skeleton horde on it, I've used Screaming Skull to go over them instead. Some of the sculpts have got this cowboy hat on there, so I just wanted to show you quickly how I painted this. I started with a base of Talon sand. I then used a wash of Seraphim Sepia, get it to this stage. And now what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to reapply the Talon sand. But I'm going to do it in a sort of a stippling crosshatchy way and try and focus it onto the brim of the hat. So you're doing sort of like quick flicks with the brush on there rather than getting a solid coat. And you want to thin your paint down a little bit more than you normally would for this. And it's probably going to take 2 or 3 little passes before you're happy with where you're at. If you do this, it adds a sort of the impression of a furred hat or texture to the actual hat, which could be quite interesting. And come back when I've done that and then highlight it. And then what I do is I'll take a bit of Karak stone and I'll just add that in sort of stippling motion just around the edge of the cap, around the brim of the hat rather, like sort of gently tapping the edge of the tip of the brush against the edge of the hat. And then for the top part, what I'll do is just on the very peaks of it, just do very quick little flicking motions with the brush, the very tip of the bristles. The next areas I'm going to highlight are going to be his brown areas. So that's going to be the jacket, his gloves, his boots, and his seat. For that, I'm going to be using Gawthor Brown. For areas like this, I'm just going to pick them out, and what I'm going to do, a nice way of doing this for like small little squares like this, is angle it so you're always drawing the brush down towards yourself, and just do the parts of these squares that are orientated like that. And then when you've done them, going that way, what you do is you just turn the model round so that you can continue to do that motion going down towards yourself. Doing it that way you can do some quite nice little squares. And for these boots and other areas, the detail is actually quite nicely sculpted. So just going to pick it out with your Gawthor Brown. I shall be back when all that is done. After I've done the brown, I'm then going to do his face or any other flesh. Now on this guy, it's not very much. You've just got his nose and his lips. But on some of the other ones, you've actually got some pretty decent amounts of face visible. So I'm going to start by using Bugman's Glow, and I'm just going to reapply that on some of the more raised areas. So on this particular one, it's just basically his nose and his lips there. But on the other ones, there's actually quite a nicely sculpted detail, like this one with the bandana. I painted this one, you can see the basic principle behind it. And then after that, I'm going to use some Cadian Flesh Tone. And that's just going to be used to pick out the very raised areas. So again, on this one, just basically the edge of his nostrils there, and a little couple of tiny little line dots sort of thing, just along his lip. There we go. After doing their faces, I'm going to highlight their beards. And this one's obviously got his orange beard. For that, I'm going to be using Troll Slayer Orange. And I'm just going to sort of overbrush it. So you do that by holding your brush sideways to it with not a lot of paint on the bristles. And just go in the direction with the detail. So you follow the bristles down, the sculpted detail of the beards down. And that'll it's kind of like a dry brush, but not a dry brush. And there you go. And for the brown beards, what I used was Gawthor Brown to go over those. And for the blonde beards, I used some Zamesi Desert in the same way. Now I'm going to highlight the cigar. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by reapplying the Mornfang brown and just carefully trying to do it and leave where the detail is sculpted in, shown to be a bit darker. It's such a tiny little bit of paint that you'll be using that basically just kind of dot it on there and you'll be alright. And then finally, to finish off the cigar part, I'm going to be using some Scrag Brown. And I'm just going to very carefully dot a little bit of it and just slip it on so it gives you that impression of a 3D shape to it. There you go. Now for painting the cherry of the cigar on the end of it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a coat of Evil Sun Scarlet. And I'm just going to basically paint the whole of what would be the cherry, or like the glowing ember part. And then, whilst that's still a little bit wet, I'm going to take some Troll Slayer Orange again and just kind of put that into some of the deeper areas, just around the edges of it. And just try and add some orange to it and add some like variation. And then, to do the ash that's going to be on the end of it, I'm going to use some Skaven Blight Dinge and just put some tiny little bits of it on the top where the ash forms. So there he is with his lit cigar. Now we're almost there. The last bits I've got to do before I show you how I'm going to do the visor is these lights on the back of it. So for the red ones, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them a highlight of Wild Rider Red. I'm just going to do that on the uppermost area of it, like nearly go around the whole thing, not quite. For the blue ones, what I'm using is some Lothern Blue, and I'm just going to do around the very edge of it, like that, and going down there like that. For the headlight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try kind of just stipple it in to the top area of it. Again, over about, I don't know, just over about half it, maybe just over. And for the yellow one, I'm going to be using some Flash Gits Yellow. And that is just going to get kind of dotted on there, because if you look, I don't know if it translates through in the video, there is some tiny little detailing on it. So I'm just going to sort of dot the yellow on there, just on the top edge of it. And then to finish them off, what I do is I take a little bit of pure white. And for the red ones, red headlights, what I do is I just put a little tiny dot of it, or a little tiny tick rather, just on the very top of it, just like that. On the square light at the back, I will just do it on the corners, just a little line of it, just like that, give that hint of brightness. For the blue headlight, what I'll do is the same sort of stippling sort of motion with the tip of the brush and just put it in the very top part of it. Try and avoid getting a solid line, try and make it a little bit dotty. And then for the yellow light, what I'm going to do is a similar sort of thing, just dotting it on, but trying to get even less area than before. For this visor, I am going to try and do this sort of almost non-metallic gold effect that they're showing on this one visor. Or at least I'm going to attempt it, and I'm going to try and show you here. Now, to begin with, I think what I'm going to try is a coat of Mornfang Brown over the whole thing, except the dark recesses here, where you've got that hinge there. I'm going to leave that black, and I'm also going to leave the rim of it black. I'm also going to thin this Mornfang Brown down a little bit as well. Try and apply it over a couple of coats. Remember, even though it does look quite stark to begin with, it will dull down as it dries. Like I said, this looks to be very close to a sort of a non-metallic effect. So I've got to be honest, I'm a little bit nervous giving this a go, so I'm curious to see if this works. And there we go. That took about 3 coats to build it up, and I've tried to build it up more solidly towards the center here. And after that, the next color I'm going to jump to is XV88, which is another GW base paint. Now this one I'm going to thin down again quite a bit, and I'm going to try and aim it more towards the center again, as well as doing some edge highlighting. Hopefully this dulls down and it doesn't look as stark when it's dry. I'm really curious. It doesn't want to be super smooth either. You kind of want it to be a bit liney. And like I said, I'm going to do some edges and go see it does dull down quite a bit as it dries. Next up is going to be Balor Brown, and this is going to be used as just an edge highlight, so like that across the top, and I'm going to use it to try and bring in the shape of the glasses as well, goggles rather. Do something like that, we make a mistake. What we do is we get a wet brush and we very quickly tidy it up. Okay, and at this point as well, we're going to try and pick out the edges of that darker bit there to try and make it stand out a bit more. So that's what seems to be the main part with doing a look like this, where you want a high amount of contrast, is well, oddly enough, actually going for a real high amount of contrast with it. So that's why you don't really want, or from what I can gather, you don't really want to have majorly smooth blends when it comes to something like this. I mean, if anybody in the comments has got any experience with non-metallic metal, then by all means, please feel free to correct me on that one. But it does very much seem to be that way. Next up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in with my Mournfang Brown and I'm not too happy with this, so I'm going to try and just lessen that up a little bit by going over it with the Mournfang Brown a little bit. I do that both sides. There we go, I'm a bit happier with that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some Uriel Yellow, which is a big jump, and this is going to be used as a very edge highlight, just on the uppermost areas like that. And the good thing is you've got the artwork off the website that you can follow a bit on this to give you some tips, which I can assure you I have done. We've got this reflective part here as well, which I'm going to try and go for, as well as I'm going to use it here to to sort of really nail in this little bit of nose piece here, and do the same for the reflective part just here. Don't be afraid to go back in and make it brighter if you feel you want to. And then the finishing touch is some pure white. So just a tiny little bit of it just in the center of this, reflection just here, little spot just on the top, and there, a little bit around the bottom, just to reinforce that highlight that's there, the reflectiveness of it. A couple of little spots across the top. Basically anywhere that you can think of that might be bright, or again, just follow the artwork on the website. There we go. And then to complete the painting, all it is a couple of coats of Warboss green over the base. Do this over the whole of the base rim and all of it. I do this before I put the flock on, so that way if the flock doesn't have complete coverage, there is just green underneath it, so it doesn't matter so much. And I like Warboss green from GW because it's kind of the closest that I've found to the original Goblin green, without having to go jumping through all the hoops of asking people what there is or using like the recommended ones. It's what I've got and it's pretty close. And I'd recommend to anybody else that's doing this to do exactly the same. Don't fret about getting the perfect Goblin green from the period to make it match perfectly. After the Warboss green has dried, I then apply a very generous layer of glue. I'm using scenic glue or basing glue. You can use PVA glue for this stuff as well, it's just as well. But when it comes to sawdust flock, I have found that the more glue you can put on, the better, because it actually soaks up into the flock itself, because the flock is made of sawdust, it's sawdust flock. So really get that glue on there, but you want it to be nice and controlled still, so you don't want to be getting the glue everywhere. Just a really nice thick layer of it on your base. And then what I do is I just take my tub of sawdust flock, put the model in there, give it a good, submerge it basically, and then just leave it for a few seconds whilst you clean your brush off, or whilst you're putting the glue on the next base. That's quite a good timing. And like I said, with the more glue you put on there, it'll actually soak through the sawdust flock a little bit. And here they all are, all finished up and looking extremely nice, at least I think they are myself. The number decals that I've used are off the Raven Guard decal sprues that you can still get. So you don't have to worry about trying to track down old decals. And as you can see, that Warboss green on the base really does help to finish them off and add that second edition look. And even though they do have a very different look to the original Squat Bikers, these ones I think have a very old hammer sort of aesthetic to them and really do fit in very nicely with the actual game itself and the model range. And I would highly recommend anybody who's interested in these to go and follow the link in the description below to their website and have a look at what else they have to offer. They've got really quite a nice selection going on. And remember, this isn't being sponsored or anything. The paint job is quite nice and simple, and it wasn't a huge amount of effort to pull off. That visor was an awful lot of fun to do, and I would also recommend that anyone give that a go, because it's quite a lot of fun. And there we go. That is the third part of the Squat Commission finished up. These bikes were so much fun to paint, not that difficult to do, and I just really enjoyed them. If any of you give them a go, I highly recommend it, and I reckon you'll have an awful lot of fun doing it too. There will be some extra videos in the future coming, but maybe even some squat characters, so stay tuned for that. The next video I'm planning on doing is going to be an awful lot of fun, but I'm a little bit apprehensive about trying this. I'm going to be attempting something straight out the pages of the Chaos Codex, so I really hope you stay tuned for that one and see how I do. Finally, if anybody would like a commission doing for anything Oldhammer related, in the description below there is a link to my website where you can go to have a look at any of my galleries or even a price list. And there is also, if you're feeling super generous, a link to my Ko-fi account where you can make a £1 payment, £1 donation, just as a one-off, and if you're feeling super generous. If not, don't worry about it, but like, share and subscribe so it helps grow the channel. And finally, after all of that stuff has been said, stay smiling and keep the Oldhammer alive.